Good morning. So if you are joining me, well, it's morning here on the East Coast of the United States. If you are joining me today live, then you are here for the Lunar Nodes webinar. We are going to cover that the Lunar Nodes have now arrived in Aries and Libra. Hang on, I'm just organizing. Okay. And even if you're not watching live, of course you have the ability to go back and to rewatch this, even if you are joining live. But it was very lovely to connect with you all. And before we started recording, I got to see some familiar faces, and so that's always nice to reconnect. And some of you are my students. So as I record this, it's August 5th, 2023. And for those that do not know who I am, or this is your first webinar with me, my name is Katie Sweetman, and I am an astrologer. I'm also a psychic medium located in the New York City area. So I'm actually right outside of Manhattan in New Jersey. And I actually created Empowering Astrology way back in 2010, because at the time I felt like there wasn't this voice in astrology that really sort of talked about astrology from a holistic view. I'm certain there was other people that were talking about astrology at that point, but at least on the online arena, I actually started in Twitter and before moving to Facebook and then Instagram. And that's how a lot of you got to know who I am. And for me, and you hear me say it every week in my live, the astrology is 50%. You're the other 50%. How can we use astrology, the parts that we can work with, and sort of, we'll say, respecting the parts that we can't change? How do we work with that, and how do we use it to grow and evolve in our lives? So this is just a quick rundown of the agenda, and perhaps this is more for those that are watching on the replay, just to give us a sense of structure, because we do need to look at some astronomy today. And I know maybe it's going to be a little bit technical for a short bit, but I think it's really important. I feel that it's really important that we understand the astronomy, because lunar nodes, and if I sort of took a poll of a lot of people, they would have no idea what the lunar nodes are. And even in astrology, it sounds a little bit strange. What are the lunar nodes? And they're actually not physical bodies in the sky. I can't point to the sky and see the webinar. Hang on, somebody's just having problems with the link. Let me just get people the link to the webinar. Okay, perils of doing this. Are you back? Okay. So we need to understand the astronomy before we can understand the astrology. And I think the lunar nodes are actually really important. They open up a portal. I know that's a little bit of a big word, but things can come and people can come in and out of our lives through the power of the nodes. And there is a little bit of this modern take on the lunar nodes. It is not rooted in classical astrology, that the nodes talk about the arc of the soul. It's something that I use in my work. I see it as somebody who's an intuitive and somebody who has sort of a deep rooting in sort of esoteric wisdom, but you don't have to necessarily believe that. And then, what are the lunar nodes in Aries and Libra as we sort of go into the beginning of 2025? And then, of course, I'm sure you all are interested in what this means for your sign. So part one, introduction. The lunar nodes are two of the most important points in the sky. And I realize you're like, how is that possible? How am I just hearing about the lunar nodes and how important they are? It's because number one, the next slide, we'll see the eclipses, they make eclipses happen, but they're two of the most important points in the sky, because they really drive the arc of events, both on a personal and a collective level, in that 18-month period of time. Lunar nodes make eclipses happen. And it's probably not the first time I'm going to say this throughout our time together today, but it's something that the lunar nodes and eclipses, they go hand in hand. And when we know what the lunar nodes are, we know, and when they are activated, we know that we have eclipse-like energy in the sky, which we'll get more into. They are a current of energy. They are a vortex. As I said earlier, the nodes will bring people and events into our lives. And if not that specific, certainly from a theme, an archetype, something will start to pull and reveal itself to you that maybe is different than what we've been navigating over the last previous 18 months when the lunar nodes were in 2 different signs. The lunar nodes write the story arc of our lives, something we will go into a little bit more. It's just something that I've seen over and over again, especially if you've lived a bit of life. There's typically a very clear correlation between events and experiences on a thematic level that run along the nodes. This isn't a webinar about the nodes in our own astrology. That would be like a 3-hour webinar. But it's to really give us an introduction of what the nodes are for Aries and Libra, but sort of to hint at that they do talk about our own personal astrology and the story arc of our lives. The lunar nodes parallel major life milestones, and because the lunar nodes and the eclipses go hand in hand, eclipses have a little bit of a reputation in astrology for making change happen, and sometimes sudden change happen. There's a reputation for a reason, but and as an astrologer, I've seen the eclipses, the lunar nodes really indicate birth of a child, a marriage, a major move, even positive things in somebody's career. So even though they have this reputation of making things happen, sometimes they can herald positive, life milestones in our life. The lunar nodes also give direction. So there is a personal element to this in the sense of your own lunar nodes, or where is the direction in the sky right now? There's this sort of basic idea that the north node is north, collective north, thematic, archetypical north, and the south node is the past. Over the next 18 months, so that's the duration that the lunar nodes will spend in Libra and Aries, we are sort of working through Libra and Aries as an archetype. Aries is going to be true north for us, and this is something that we'll get more into throughout the webinar, but we all have our own personal experience with Aries, both as a sign, as an archetype, and we'll learn more what that sign and archetype means. But Libra, because the South Node is in Libra, we have work to do with the sign. It means we have to go back to the past. We have to look at relationships, for example. And because of the eclipses and just sort of the rough time frame of the eclipses into the beginning of 2025 is we're going to have eclipses in Aries and Libra. In fact, we're going to have an eclipse in Libra on October 14th of 2023. 6 months after that, we're going to have a pair of eclipses in Aries and Libra in 2024. We're going to have an eclipse, and I believe it's in Libra in October 2024. And we do have some eclipses in Aries and Libra in 2025, and that closes out the cycle. And these periods, roughly October, roughly April, parts of March, is when we're going to see this story get activated. And again, we all have our own personal relationship with Aries and Libra. It might be our own sign. It might be the sign of our career. It might be the sign of relationships, for example. But beyond that, we have our own relationship with the archetype. Remember, there are 12 signs in the zodiac. They're not just 12 people in the world, but there's a range of experience and a range of archetype that is within each of the 12 signs that really paint this richer portrait of life. Wherever Aries or Libra is in our own personal astrology, we will see change, and for some, marked change over the next 18 months. If you have planets, major degrees, I'm getting a little bit technical for a moment, within a certain amount of distance of these eclipses, you might see a big turning point, for example. I know you hear me say the astrology is 50%, you're the other 50%, but eclipses, they talk about an energy that we can't change. We can, of course, have free will and we can show up during this time in a certain way, but almost like a change of seasons, almost like a change of hour, that part we can't change. Part two, let's do some astronomy. And if maybe it's too early for you, we need some coffee, but let's look at some astronomy of the lunar nodes. So astrology is first astronomy. Astronomy is our ability to look into the sky. It's daytime here in the United States, the East Coast of the United States. The sun is out. I know that earlier this week it was a full moon. I can observe the full moon. I know that there's a change of seasons. These are all astronomical, in some cases, meteorological events. But what astrology does is assign symbolic meaning to astronomy. And so we need to understand celestial mechanics. What makes a new moon? What makes a full moon? We're going to look at some technical details just in a moment. But the definition of a lunar node on an astronomical level is that it's the 2 points in the ecliptic that the moon intersects as it goes around the Earth. And we're actually going to see in the next few slides what that looks like, first starting with a little bit of some technical design. This might look a little bit intense. It's very simple. The first thing we need to look at is that yellowish dot that's marked S at the bottom. That is the sun. Then we see that green dot. It's marked with an E. That's the Earth. Then we see this bluish circle. Maybe it's a little bit hard to see if you're on a device. It's labeled with an M. That's the moon. So the the Earth takes 1 year to go around the sun. Now the moon is at an angle. It's sort of, we'll see that it's kind of off the ecliptic by 5 degrees. And that moon is going around the Earth as the Earth itself rotates around, creating the night and day, and as the Earth goes around the sun. And that starts to form these 2 points called the lunar nodes. And you may see the number 18.6 years, because that is the amount of time that the nodes precess across the sky. The AN is the ascending node. The DN is the descending node. Somebody in. And so here's some animation, and on the left side, although we don't see it, is the light of the sun coming from the sun. And so the light is casting a shadow with the sphere of the Earth. The moon is the secondary object that's going around the circle in the middle. And now we've rotated the view, thanks NASA, to see that the moon is actually going around the Earth at a slight angle. It's called declination. And so when the moon hits a certain point, which you see now that the image has rotated, that creates an eclipse. And in this case, which I think is a little bit clearer in the next slide, creates a lunar eclipse. So this is actually a visualization of a lunar eclipse, as if we were seeing a lunar eclipse from space. It's very hard to see, possibly if you're on a device, but there's a little dot that's sort of in that shadow that's cast by the Earth, and that is what creates the lunar eclipse, and that's what makes the moon turn red. Thank you all for getting through the details of the astronomy. So when a full moon or a new moon is in particular alignment with these nodes, it makes an eclipse. So the last eclipses that we had were in April. That is correct. No, April and May. April 20th, we had a solar eclipse because the new moon in Aries was within a certain degree of distance from the node. Up until just this past July, the nodes were in Taurus and Scorpio. So that north node was in Taurus, and it was just near the beginning of Taurus and close enough to that Aries new moon for a solar eclipse. And that eclipse in Aries is the first in a series of eclipses that takes us into 2025 between Aries and Libra. Then we had a lunar eclipse on May 5th, but that lunar eclipse was in Scorpio, and that was the last lunar eclipse, thank the Lord, that we were going to have in Scorpio for 9 years. And that was because the full moon was within a certain amount of distance from the ecliptic, for example. As I said earlier, it takes 18.6 years for the nodes to precess. This is what's known as a draconic or a nodal period. And even though we're talking about astronomy, that 18.6 years is important because it creates a whole cycle for the lunar nodes and also eclipses. In Latin, the nodes are referred to as caput draconis and cauda draconis, the head and tail of the dragon. And so the ancients really saw the sun and the moon being swallowed by a demon. I realize it's it's kind of an intense statement, but that's the way that the new moons and the eclipses were seen by the ancients, and therefore created a little bit of this mythology. But I think to some degree it does coincide with the major life events, that the nodes were actually malefic in nature. And so therefore the ancient view is that an eclipse brought ill fortune. I personally think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because like I said, like an eclipse can foretell the birth of a child. It can foretell a marriage. It can foretell positive things in our life. So now let's get into the astrology of the lunar nodes. Again and again, I'm going to say that first, the lunar nodes make eclipses happen. So we can't really think about the lunar nodes in Aries and Libra without thinking about the fact that there will be eclipses in Aries and Libra, which we get into a sign-by-sign guide. You'll get a sort of a preview of what these eclipses are bringing into your life, and in some cases, leaving your life. Second, the lunar nodes create a story arc, which I mentioned in the introduction. It's because there is this magnetic pull that goes between these two signs. And that magnetic pull can bring people into our lives. It can bring opportunities. It can bring events. It can bring turning points and pivots. These lunar nodes, they focus that story arc on a particular part of our life. So, just for an example, if you are a Capricorn or Capricorn rising, that story arc is really playing out between career, your public life, your public reputation, but also home and family, because Aries and Libra form the signs that correspond with these two important areas of your life. For me as an astrologer, especially when I sit down, and maybe you have watched my 2023 astrology webinar, eclipses are what I would put that as the premier event, or one of the premier events for the year. When I look at the coming year as an astrologer, I'm like, where are the nodes? Where are the eclipses happening? What are our eclipse periods? Do any major planets change signs? So for example, in 2023, the nodes change signs. The nodes change signs in July. Okay, that tells me something as an astrologer. It means that the personal and collective compass is changing for the coming year, and in this case, into 2025. I knew that Saturn and Pluto changed signs. I knew that was going to put some emphasis on a March, for example, or June. And then looking at, major retrogrades, for example. So every year at 6 months intervals, there are a pair of eclipses that activate two signs. So as I was saying earlier, we had a pair of eclipses in April and May of 2023. 6 months later, we'll have another pair of eclipses, in this case, October 14th and October 28th. Of 2023, and that interval repeats itself as long as there's an Earth, and as long as there's a sun and a moon, that interval repeats itself. So in last year, in 2022, we actually had the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio, and I don't know if you've sort of picked up on the fact that Taurus and Scorpio mean the nodes are actually going backwards. So Aries and Libra are Aries, in the case of Aries, Aries is the start of the zodiac. Taurus is the second sign, but the North Node went from Taurus to Aries. But it also means that in 2022, we were wrapping up a story arc that was really playing out both thematically between Taurus and Scorpio, but also personally, depending on where those two signs are. And maybe you are a Taurus or Scorpio. So this year, now we have a change, and we had that first eclipse back on April 20th, but the nodes changed in July. So like, how's that possible, Katie? Well, even though the nodes were still in Taurus Scorpio, as I said earlier, the new moon that we had on April 20th, the solar eclipse, was within a certain amount of distance, even though it was in Aries. So we need to look at that Aries solar eclipse on April 20th as the start of a story. And it's an old story, but it's the start of a chapter that takes you into 2025. And if we're speaking in 2025, I will say what was going on in April and even May of 2023, because something now is wrapping up if we are doing this in 2025, for example. And we had a similar thing back in 2021. We had a lunar eclipse in Taurus on November 19th of 2021, but the nodes were still in Gemini and Sagittarius. So this was sort of our preview. And in 2023, the first half of 2023, we got a preview of a new story that now, going into October, and maybe we're going to feel it in September as well, that story is really coming to the forefront. Again, the lunar nodes take 18.6 to travel the zodiac. So even though we were looking at this from an astronomical view a few slides ago, it's to know that when you look at astrology, which is from the perspective of Earth, this is why it seems like the sun is going around the Earth, but we know in actuality that's not the case, that over an arc of 18.6 years, the nodes will go through all of the zodiac. So 18.6 years ago, the nodes were in the same place as they are now. 18.6 years from now, the nodes will be in the same place, for example. Every 18 months, the lunar nodes change signs. And so from January of 2022 until just this past July, it was July 17th, the nodes were in Taurus and Scorpio. Actually, previous to that, you heard me say they were in Gemini and Sagittarius. It was May of 2020 to January of 2022 that they were in Gemini and Sagittarius. We had eclipses in Gemini and Sagittarius. And it was really interesting. And I realized this at the same time as the pandemic and COVID, but there really was a shift, May, June of 2020. And because the South, not because, but maybe parallel to that South Node in Sagittarius, we became very aware on a collective level, regardless of what you believe in, social issues, social causes, justice, fairness, equity, also the ability to travel or not travel. And the last time the South Node was in Sagittarius was 18 years before that, and that was 9/11, and the whole travel industry changed. So it's interesting, at least on a sort of a larger level, what changes on a collective level? What do we have to look at on a collective level when the South Node goes into a new sign? Because the South Node is the past. It's sort of our baggage. It's what we're working on. And now that's changed. We have to work on Libra. So every time the nodes shift, not only the eclipses shift, but there is a thematic change for the collective. I think it's a little soon, maybe it's not soon, to really see where Aries and Libra is starting to come in to our collective conscious or even our collective subconscious, because the nodes are connected to the moon, and the moon connects us to this idea of the subconscious memory, instinct, feeling, want. So there's sort of this, change of music that's happened, and it starts to pick up what this change of music is for everybody. And so now there's a new north for us to reach for, and that new north happens to be Aries, whether that's a collective statement or whether that's personal based on your own astrology. again, we have work to do. Wherever the South Node is, we have work to do. We had work to do with the South Node in Scorpio since January of 2022. And if you know the sign of Scorpio, Scorpio, in contrast to Taurus, the North Node at the time, talks about decay and endings and the things that we sometimes still hold on to, but they've reached the end of their life cycle. We have to let them go. They need to go into the earth. We need to prepare for something new. And maybe the work that we did with the South Node in Scorpio over the last 18 months was to prepare for the new beginnings. Aries is one of the signs of new beginnings that will start to occur over the coming months. Part 4, portal, time, and space. The nodes reveal where people and events come in and out of our lives, like a portal, whether that's a comment about your own astrology and your own lunar nodes, meaning where were the lunar nodes when you were born, or presently. It's not just eclipses that the nodes make happen. There could be a planet that comes into contact with the nodes, for example, and that will pull people and events in and out of our lives. And every 6 months, that portal gets activated through a solar or lunar eclipse. And so we're going to see that at the closer that we get to October of 2023. But time bends around the nodes. It's, especially as we get to that midpoint of the nodes, and the midpoint is always 3 months after a solar and lunar eclipse, 3 months before a solar or lunar eclipse. And we actually just went through that period over the past few weeks. In fact, this week, the sun was at the same degree, Leo, as the May 5th lunar eclipse. And so I just personally, especially with clients in my own life and maybe even things in the news, seeing things happening that had a direct connection to something that happened in April or May, for example. And things, time can speed up, time can feel heavy, time can feel liminal around the nodes. So it's not just a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse that can happen around the nodes. A planet, Venus, Mars, can activate, for example, the lunar nodes. And something that I've noticed, and I put faded in air quotes, and I really like faded, it's kind of a big word. For example, I've noticed when Venus squares the lunar nodes, there's something about relationships. And that's not to say that it's for every last person on the planet, but a relationship issue that can come out of nowhere, or two people, like the relationship sort of turns a corner, or it's a need to decide something, or somebody comes in into one's life to create a relationship. So it depends on the planets. Mars can bring up these sort of deep feelings around taking action and going after what we want, but sometimes frustration and sometimes anger and even rage, for example. So for me as an astrologer, the nodes always reveal where a major story is playing out at any time. When I sit down and I go through somebody's chart before I work with them as on a one-on-one capacity, I'm looking at the eclipses, I'm looking at the nodes, I'm paying attention to the planets that in this case may be in Aries and Libra, and noting the degrees, noting like if there's going to be an eclipse along that planet. And I can get a sense of what thematically at least is playing out with somebody. At the end of the day, and I realize maybe this, I think there's this expectation that astrology just gives us the answers, that it tells us exactly what's going to happen, and almost like, kind of reading the cheat sheet, so to speak. Astrologers never truly know what's going to happen. I think eclipses and certainly the nodes can inspire a potentiality, whether it's our ability to make a prediction or at least know where there's a story that's happening. But life will always be life, and things, especially with the nodes, there's always room for surprises. So eclipses are the harbingers of life milestones. Again, like, if somebody's in a major relationship and I see eclipses coming to the point of relationship in somebody's chart, the question is, what's the next milestone for the relationship? Is it two people making a commitment to one another? If it's more of a traditional commitment, is it marriage? Is it cohabitation? Is it an end of a relationship? So it could be a time when it's, the major, when I say major life milestones, these are the things that, God forbid, when you die and your life flashes before your eyes, like these are the things that you remember. You remember getting married, or you remember the birth of a child. You remember like those major moments that really sit with you throughout your life. And the nodes are really marking these major lives, these major events in our lives. And I realize this sounds dramatic, but the eclipses they're dramatic. That's just the reality. So how do we navigate this time knowing that, for example, true north, air quotes, is Aries? How do we work with that energy, and how do we work on Libra, for example? And I think the ancients knew, and maybe this is why eclipses have a reputation, why the nodes have a reputation, is that they can change our lives very swiftly. And so wherever Aries and Libra is in your astrology, we'll see change. So part 5, arc of the soul. And I said this in the introduction, and it's for you to at least understand, and maybe I didn't need to say this part, but I think it's important, especially if you're doing your own investigation of astrology, is that this concept of the lunar nodes talking about the path of the soul is a modern concept. In traditional astrology, this is not part of it, but this is something that really has its origins in late 19th century spiritualism. And I believe it's in the early 20th century, and I think it's Dane Rudyard, possibly other astrologers that were really bringing this idea of, let's say, esotericism and spirituality to the nodes that doesn't have its roots in classical astrology. And maybe, depends on how much astrology you've been exposed to, maybe you've heard the term evolutionary astrology. Stephen Forrest is a well-known name, for example. There's also Jeffrey Wolf Green. These were not only the two astrologers, but certainly the main astrologers that were really bringing this new branch of astrology into existence, which has its roots in the 1970s and 80s. And I'm not, sorry, it's my dog. I'm not an evolutionary astrologer, but it's something that I think in the history of my own exploration of astrology. In fact, at one point, there was a plan to study with Stephen Forrest as a whole. Their story. It didn't happen because of monetary issues at the time for me. But it certainly informed my path as an astrologer. And for me, looking at a chart from a holistic, humanistic, hopefully compassionate perspective, seeing a greater journey in the chart and how the nodes and Saturn too, you know how much I love Saturn, really talk about this bigger picture. And I'm a bigger picture astrologer. Like if you work with me, I like to get into the bigger story that is unfolding in your life and how there are key moments that really build the story, build the narrative. And so there's this sort of rough idea with the lunar nodes. So the north node is what we are working towards. It could be completely uncharted territory depending on how the chart is built. It could be something that is familiar, but that is your true north. South node is the past or even past lives. And it's not necessarily that you have to believe this, but I think bare minimum, there's a lot of instinct in that south node, whether it's where the south node is right now, whether it's your own south node, for example. So when you were born, the lunar nodes were in 2 signs of the zodiac. And there's a lot of other astrologers that write about this. Janet Spiller is another one, although she's passed on. This idea of the astrology for the soul. But the lunar nodes talk about this sort of evolutionary path that you will see. And, for me as an astrologer, I see some validity in that, and certainly talking to somebody who's in a very different life stage versus somebody who, let's say, in their 20s, you can really see that arc play out. And for me, and maybe this is like a personal share, it's like if knowing where my nodes are helps me to align with something, and something that both feels familiar and comfortable, but also something that might feel unfamiliar, because we are working towards to integrate that north node in our chart. So there are certain things that astrologers will start fighting over. One is house systems. That's a technical point. The other thing is past lives and the nodes, but to each their own. And there's kind of this concept, which I think is way more complicated than this, but this sort of south node bad, north node good mentality. I think it's, again, way more complicated than that. And I think that, as we, look at the south node, whether it's the south node in Libra, whether it's our own south node, there's a memory, there's something that's there. We have a familiarity with it. And so how do we take the best of that? For example, that south node can be a very complex place for us. There's memory, there's experience, there's subconscious, unconsciousness, but there's can also be talents. Maybe it's to look at what are the positive things. South node in Libra, what are the positive things about relationships? Whether it's our ability to be compassionate, or ability to help other people, whether it's our ability to listen. These are also South Node or Libra archetypes, for example. And how do we bring that forward in a different way to go towards that Aries North Node? For me, regardless, the nodes, whatever you believe in, the nodes pull at us like a karmic force that can't be ignored. And I'm pretty sure at this point in my career, if there have been major events in your lives, the nodes and hand in hand eclipses are not that far behind. And also, and this happens, and hopefully this isn't too much of a tangent, in synastry, and synastry is what means, what happens between two people's astrology, like how does it overlap, how does it intersect? When people's planets align along the nodes, there is a karmic, and sometimes like a soul recognition, a pull between two people that sometimes, for better or for worse, is a bit hard to escape. So part 6, the lunar nodes, Aries and Libra. Well, we've already gotten a taste of what it means for the lunar nodes in Aries and Libra. So on July 17th of this year, 2023, the lunar nodes moved into Aries and Libra. We left a period from January 2022 where we were navigating the heavy emotions of the Scorpio South Node. It was not easy the past few years, and it's not just the nodes, the South Node in Scorpio. We had Saturn was in Aquarius. We had Saturn square Uranus. We had things with Pluto as well. But I think that, and I don't know, maybe this is just me saying this as a Scorpio, it was heavy the past 18 months. It's just Scorpio is a water sign. Water sign, or water as an element, speaks to emotional depth, emotional connection, emotional bonds, our ability to leave something behind so we can move on into new space. And sometimes there's a bit of a pull with Scorpio, and it's hard to leave Scorpio behind and take that step forward, that leap of faith to go into something new. And maybe we're doing a lot of soul searching. Maybe we're doing a lot of navel gazing over the past 18 months. And, maybe we just needed Scorpio to put a lot of things in focus, because Scorpio, there are no illusions in Scorpio. Scorpio will show you as it is. And maybe we needed that over the past, having been through a lot of big astrological events, or a lot of personal events since 2020. And maybe to go back to that Scorpio South Node for a second, like maybe, Scorpio is also grief. There's a lot of different experiences within the Scorpio archetype, but I think grief is certainly in that mix. And maybe we needed to grieve for something over the past 18 months. On the other side of it, we saw the North Node in Taurus, and typically Taurus is the ability to come back to life. Taurus being the rebirth of life after the decay of Scorpio, for example, and to find solid ground and to figure out what we need, to be stable and secure. There's a big focus on money and finance over the last 18 months. But the thing that was different over the past 18 months was because Uranus was also in Taurus. And so this wasn't just solid ground over the past 18 months. This was a need to completely remake what that solid ground was. And maybe that was the scorpionic process of needing to really let go of something from the past. Again, now the North Node is in Aries and the South Node is in Libra. There is a change of theme. So Aries is an archetype. As the first sign of the zodiac, it really brings in a range of experience. And I've said this in previous webinars, astrology has a very northern hemisphere bias. I know some of us either watching live or watching on the replay, maybe in the southern hemisphere. And the North Node is really right now bringing us into the energy of spring, the renewal of life after the phase of winter that was ushered in by Capricorn, symbolically winter solstice. Aries is the spring equinox. Aries, first sign, it's about being first, leadership. It's ruled by Mars. It's about the I and the individual. That as an archetype has two sides. We can either have the bravery and courage, Aries, to rush forward, to revitalize, to start something new, or we can have the other side of the coin, impatience. We can sort of rush quickly and not really, and be on impulse instead of really taking your time to figure something out. So we need to reach for Aries, and Aries, again, is individuality, courage, motivation, self-reliance. And I think self-reliance is really important to connect with, because with the energy of Mars, Mars being the ruler of Aries, it's a very typically self-reliant sign. It can do it on its own. Because this is about themes and archetypes, each and every one of you has your own historical relationship with these words. Maybe it is hard to individuate, hard to find courage, hard to find motivation, or even self-reliance. Hard is not a fate. It's just a present moment, a present reality, a present temperature read. But now the nodes are saying, how do you change this? How do you do the hard thing? How do you do the brave thing? How do you do the courageous thing? How do you reignite your motivation? How do you have the confidence in yourself to be self-reliant, for example? And, I was thinking about this last night because I was watching this thing on HBO called The 100-Foot Wave. It's actually really good. And it's about surfing, but I think its strength is that it's about surfing, but not about surfing at the same time. And in the sense that it really gets into competition. Competition is Aries. Drive, you need to have a certain amount of fearlessness to be able to put your physical being on a board within 60, 70, 80, and then sort of the idea is that the 100-foot wave is sort of this mythology that everybody is chasing, and how, they said at one point, life is the 100-foot wave. You're sort of looking for this thing that may exist or may not exist. But, how do we put ourselves into a situation that may be, and I don't mean like bodily scary, like do not put yourself in harm's way. But I mean this metaphorically speaking, symbolically speaking, doing something that is typically or historically has been hard for us to do. And maybe that's to stand up for yourself. Maybe that's to be the leader. And Aries is a very quick, instinctual sign. Again, that there's pluses and minuses to that statement, but how do we trust ourselves quickly, go after what we want, really identify our desires and conquer our fear, because fear really pulls us away from what I would say like positive Aries. Aries is also a very physical sign. If you have a strong Aries in your chart, or you are an Aries, or you have a strong Mars by extension, you need typically a lot of physical exercise because it's a physical sign. Mars is a physical planet. So on a collective level, we all on some level need to find more physical activity. If it's not going to the gym or going for a walk, whatever, of course, is relevant for you, it's to bring in that sort of movement and motivation and outlet for this energy in your own life. There is the other side of Aries. Even though it's the North Node, and even though we think, oh yeah, everything's just going to work out great wherever the North Node is, it's the South Node where things are complicated. It's more complicated than that. And it's to, I think, on some level, collectively and even personally, over the next 18 months, we need to navigate anger, frustration, where we feel blocked, where we can't rush forward or take action, where our desires are not being actualized, and then channel it into something healthy, like to take the steps that we can take, even if they are small. But Aries isn't the totality of it. We also have the South Node and Libra to look at. So what is the archetype of Libra? Both Aries and Libra, they form this axis in the zodiac that talk about relationships. For me, it's the relational axis. Yes, we don't think of Aries as a sign of relationships, but it talks about the natural give and take that happens between two people. Whether it's socialization, because we need Libra, even though the South Node's in Libra, we need Libra. We can't always be so Aries. It's so much about myself that we forget other people. It's about finding the balance, and that's, to Libra's credit as a sign. And I think it's a very powerful sign, Libra, and I think it's a sign that's not always fully valued in popular astrology, but it's a sign that really teaches us the importance of socialization, of asking for help, making sure that we are not always doing it alone, because we are human beings and we are, genetically hardwired to socialize. And so Libra does speak to relationship, connection, socialization, compromise, even manners. Libra, socialization says that you do this and you don't do this, for better or for worse. You hold the door for somebody. Of course, you don't have to. Nobody's forcing you to do that, but it's nicer. It creates an energy to hold the door for somebody, to be polite, to help somebody, to really think about, to put ourselves in the best light and presence. Manners, grace, charm. Libra is ruled by Venus, but the South Node is in Libra. So we have to look at maybe the other side of this and kind of some more complicated experiences. So to that point, what is our karmic history with Libra as an archetype? Meaning, what is your relationship with relationships? Is, being a little bit silly for a moment, are relationships a wasteland? Do you have a hard time connecting with people? Is it not easy for you to socialize? Or are you overly reliant on relationships, or sort of stuck in the rigid formality that Libra can speak to because of social expectations, family expectations, of the expectations of your community to conform to a certain way? I think on some level, that said, we are all looking at our past relationships, and this could be what I call capital R relationships. Our capital R relationships are our major partnerships, our long-term relationships, and even if we've been married, the people we've been married to, for example. What is in your blind spot with Libra? Is it something that you don't even think about your relationship with relationships? You're running on autopilot. Well, this is not the time to run on autopilot, because the nodes are in Aries-Libra, and we need to have a shift in how we do these two signs. And autopilot is just another way of saying, what is your unconsciousness with the sign? And even your unconsciousness can be socialization. You didn't even think that it's possible for you to have the type of relationship that you want to have, versus the type of relationship that a parent or your society or your culture tells you that you must have. And there's going to be a push and pull between these two things over the next 18 months. I think there's some safety in Libra. The South Node, it's not to say South Node bad, it's sort of South Node, there's history, like we're there, we're comfortable with it. When I think of the South Node in Libra, I don't know, maybe this is going to sound funny. I always think of like sort of the rigid social structures of English Victorian society. It's like you do this, you don't do this. Like your whole work is to, sounds like a Jane Austen novel, is to like get married and to like secure your position in the world. I also think about South Node in Libra, like, when we're in middle school and they have the dance and the boys are on one side, the girls are on one side or whatever. And there's that sort of fear of like leaving behind and like going off and connecting with people. So it's like, there's a little bit of a comfort zone over the next 18 months. Venus wants comfort. Venus wants something that's safe and easy. And I mean that in the best possible way, because we need that in life. I don't want to make a fuss. Like, I don't want to change things. But Mars instigates, Mars pushes, Mars individuates. Mars tries to get us to have the courage and bravery to leave behind what is safe and secure. So we may be used to doing things with somebody else. It's like, oh, I'm not going to go see this movie because I don't have a friend to go with me. So I'm not going to see this movie. Or I'm not going to go to this concert because I have nobody to go with, but I really want to see this concert. Well, what if the most radical thing you could do right now is to go by yourself? I know it's uncomfortable and maybe socially a little strange. People like, and maybe it's all inside yourself. It's something internal. But it's to do the things that you actually want to do, because at the end of the day, Aries, Mars is about desire. We might have some baggage to work on, because the baggage, whether it's social, whether it's personal, whether it's the past, it's your trauma. Like, how can I be brave and courageous? How can I go after what I want? I've got my past experiences. I have my family. I have this telling me that I can't do it. So that's the work that we're all doing in our own personal and collective way. We have to have the courage to strike out, and that's Aries is the sign of really striking out, going it alone. Aries is a very self-reliant sign. It's an energy, an archetype, and by extension, Mars, when people are self-employed. To be self-employed, and I'm saying this as somebody who's self-employed, it's scary. It's not the thing that I was socially conditioned to do. My mother was like, you get a job, you get a safe and stable job, you work for the government. I'm from Washington, D.C. area. And you have these great benefits, you get a pension, but I don't want to do that. She wanted me to be a teacher. You work for the county, you get benefits, because that was her value system. And I'm not saying it's easy to strike out and go on your own and sort of step outside of what's comfortable and that sort of safety net of Libra and Venus, but sometimes it's necessary. So perhaps you see that reflected in your own experiences. So there's sort of this root story that I've seen over and over again, especially with people who have South Node in Libra, North Node in Aries, or even South Node in the 7th house, North Node in the 1st. The story's kind of like this. There's some story about relationships and how very often it's easy for us to defer to another person. It could be a partner, or even how we defer to other people in general, meaning socialization. Because we are very quick to defer to other people, our wants, our needs, and our desires get lost. And sometimes we betray those desires. It's like South Node in Libra. Okay, whatever you want, I'm fine. And there's something to be said, just as a socialization and social structure, about being able to compromise. Compromise is one thing, but completely capitulating your own wants and desires is another. So I think on some level over the next 18 months, we have to see where we have in the past, South Node, have completely betrayed our wants and needs and desires, whether it's to please somebody. I want to please my partner. I want to be the person my partner wants me to be. want to please my parents. I want to be the son or the daughter that my parents want me to be. And I'm going to not go to art school. I'm going to not become an astrologer. I'm going to not whatever it is. But we have to look at those past stories, not to be captured by them, not to relive them. It's to sort of have the light bulb go off so we can change and put things into balance. North Node and Aries. I think it's important to understand cycles of time, and that the last time the nodes were in Aries and Libra was February of 2014 until December of 2015. And we had eclipses. I believe it was in Aries at the end of 2013. But this was the half cycle. So the South Node at the time, 9 years ago, was in Aries. The North Node was in Libra. Previous to that, remember, 18.6 years, I've said it about 5 times at this point, the South Node was in Aries. Sorry, the South Node was in Libra from December of 2004 to June of 2006. North Node was in Aries at that time as well. So to go back, what was going on in your life during those periods, it's not to say that they're going to be a repeat, but there may be a thread that runs between those different times. And so the basic premise is that we count back, so 18 years or 18, 19 years for the full cycle. And if you're old enough, you can even go back further. You can go back into the, I guess it would be the late 80s. It would be in the 80s to see when that was before. And then 9 years is the half cycle. So what were you doing 18 years ago? I'm going to tell you what I was doing 18 years ago. In November of 2004, I moved to New York City because I left behind, maybe I'm sort of narrating something that I just said. Now my light bulb is going off. I actually have maybe this is a little technical, not my North Node, my midheaven is at 16 Libra. My IC home family is at 16 Aries. So Aries Libra, even though I'm a Scorpio, even though I'm Sag rising, actually form the backbone of my life. So go back 20 years and I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. If you told me in 2001 that I was just going to up and move to New York City, I would have thought you were crazy. I honestly, coming out of college, thought that my whole life was I go back to the DC area, I get a job with a nonprofit or a government agency like you're supposed to do, and you live in the suburbs. And then one day a light bulb goes off and I'm like, wait a second, I don't want this. This is terrible. It's not a bad choice for other people. It's a bad choice for me. I needed something new. I needed something where I could express my individuality, for example. And I had an experience at the end of beginning of December of 2003 where I went to New York City for the first time and I got stuck in a blizzard. Long story short, it made me fall in love with New York City. And there was this deep, like a gong hitting me, like an inner knowing. I knew in December of 2003 that I had to move to New York City. And I sort of denied it for a couple of months. And then in February of 2004, I was visiting my friend in England. She was at Cambridge at the time. And it was through retelling this sort of kind of crazy story where I got stuck in a blizzard and I couldn't get back to DC. There were no trains. My flight got canceled. I was like, oh, shoot, I actually do need to move to New York City. It was this inner calling. This is what the nodes do. It's this thing pulls at us. And so it pulled me. I gave myself 6 months to really get my head screwed on and really integrate the fact that I was going to completely change my life. And then, and I think it was the summer of 2004, I started my interview process. And my personal goal was to get to New York City before my 26th birthday, November 2004. And I got to New York City. I left my job, finally got a job, I think was in October of 2004, because I wasn't going to move without a job. And then arrived 3 days, 4 days, something like that before my 26th birthday. So that's what I was doing 18 years ago, and also 9 years ago, which I'll sort of, for the sake of time, spare the story. That changed my life as well. So, but I know my own astrology, and maybe you see some shades of your own personal story 18 years ago, 9 years ago, for example. But sometimes it means that we have to, Aries, do something that's a little crazy. And I mean that in the best possible way, because it means getting out of something that has become too comfortable or never fit you in the first place. So there's this need to individuate with the North Node, or even South Node in Aries as well, because I think that was also on a level present 9 years ago when the nodes were flipped. Maybe you were born with the North Node in Aries, and you see that this is actually something that comes up repeatedly in your life. Either it is easy for you, or maybe hard for you to really make that leap, whether it is to, in your own way, move to New York City, where one person, two people that you met off the internet. Like, this was 2003. Like, you didn't move places because you met somebody, like you made a friend in another part of the world. And then, I guess New York City is not that far from Washington, D.C., but it was just a completely different place in the United States, if you know what I'm talking about. If you have North Node in Aries, it means you're going to have a nodal return. There's something about your experiences into the beginning of 2025 that reignites something, a story, an arc of evolution, or even an arc of your soul that has been present throughout your whole life. Finding courage, finding bravery, learning to individuate, for example. Maybe you were born with the South Node in Aries, and so there is this history with Aries. You're really good at being self-reliant. You don't need anybody. You can do it yourself, and there are pluses and minuses with that. But the nodes talk about putting things back into balance from an archetypical standpoint. And if you do have the nodes reversed, this is what's called a nodal opposition. And there will be experiences over the next 18 months that really bring up this story around, I don't need anybody, or I'm trying to do it alone, or how do I connect with people? How do I relate to other people? How do I interact and socialize? And finally, like, maybe you were born with the nodes in Cancer and Capricorn. There's a reason I'm highlighting Cancer and Capricorn as opposed to all the other signs, is because Cancer, Capricorn, Aries, Libra are the cardinal, what's called the cardinal cross. Aries, Libra, imagine a line is going across, and then Cancer, Capricorn will be the line that's intersecting. This is called a square in astrology. It's going to be a dynamic period if your nodes are in Cancer, Capricorn, and it brings in a bigger story that if you do have nodes in Cancer, Capricorn, it talks about family, home, career, being able to find the balance between the two, finding the balance between duties and responsibilities, but also opening up your heart to what is meaningful and important, for example. So now, here we are. Let's have a sign-by-sign guide. And again, like, if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat, or we can get them at our Q&A at the end. So if you are an Aries and Aries rising, it's a little bit different if you're an Aries sun, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But the basic premise is that you've now entered a dynamic period in your life. So the last time you had eclipses in your sign, this would be the 2014, 2015 timeframe. This would also be the 2004, 2005 timeframe, as we talked about. So you're in this time where it's about new beginnings. You're going to have eclipses in your sign, and you may feel like life is opening doors, and in some cases closing doors, but you are being pushed into a new chapter of your life. And this is a new chapter that may bring personal milestones, changes, and as I said before, new beginnings. So this is where it's a little bit different if you're an Aries sun. It really depends, and this is going to be a little bit technical, and we can't get too much into this because it would be it's not possible, because it really depends on your own personal astrology. But if your sun is on an eclipse, meaning your birthday is on an eclipse is on your half birthday, it could mean that you're in a time where you're sort of the old phrase of putting it is like your star rises or fall. If you see people suddenly in the news around an eclipse and you go to Wikipedia, you look up their birthday, or that maybe if they're not an Aries Libra, but you're going to see a lot of Aries and Libra in the news in the coming 18 months. It could be for the right reasons, it could be for the wrong reasons. And I'm being a little bit of a traditional astrologer here at the moment. I'm sure this has nothing to do with my Aries and Aries rising people that are watching. It's, sometimes an eclipse can be the scandal that something comes out, but that's just, sort of talking about something broadly. But if you have an eclipse on your sun, or maybe you have major planets in Aries, or even by extension Libra, it's going to be a turning point in your life. The eclipses that we're going to have throughout 2023 and the ones in Aries, Libra in 2025 repeat almost to the degree, roughly give or take, from the eclipses of 2004 and 2005. What's different is that the planets are at a very different place in 2004, 2005 than they are right now. Because the South Node is now in Libra, you're going to have eclipses in Libra. Libra is your relationship sign. So there's going to be a lot of focus on relationship, and that means different things to different Aries and Aries rising. Maybe there isn't a present partnership or relationship, and somebody comes in and maybe it's fine, and maybe something where it brings up some old issues. It really, you can't sort of say, oh, you're going to have a South Node eclipses in your seventh. That's going to be complicated. It's you really have to really take the whole chart or the whole person into account. But nevertheless, as an astrologer, when I see eclipses in the seventh or the seventh house, or even the seventh sign, so Libra is Aries' seventh sign, this is the classical indication of a marriage, a major relationship, and even a major milestone between two people who are in a serious relationship. And I put in parentheses, example, children. Sometimes two people are together for 5 years. They don't have kids. They want to have kids. Here comes the eclipse, and it sort of says that here's the potentiality for there to be the birth of a child. In some cases, it's the end of a relationship. Somebody needs to strike out on their own and individuate. They've become too overly reliant on a relationship, or two people who need to renegotiate the power dynamic in a relationship. Maybe it's too much about the partner. Maybe it's not enough about the other person, or maybe vice versa. And it's just Libra putting things back into balance. But like the 2014, 2015, 2004, 2005, and even going back 9 and 18 years before that, this talks about a period that may link, thematically speaking, to these different points in time. And maybe write in your journal, because 9 years from now we're going to have the half cycle, 18 and a half years from now we're going to have the full cycle. So Taurus and Taurus rising, the North Node is going to be in your 12th, the South Node is going to be in your 6th. So this sort of brings to a close a very dynamic chapter in your life, or at least begins to bring one part of it to a close. It hasn't been easy to be a Taurus, or even by extension a Taurus rising. I think if you are a Taurus sun, it's more personal because your sun is there. But what do I mean by it's been dynamic or not easy? It's because you had eclipses in your sign, November of 2021, May and April, May of 2022, October, November of 2022, and then just this past May 5th, we had the lunar eclipse in Scorpio. But you have Uranus in your sign, and Uranus has 2-3 more years left in Taurus. So this has been about shaking Taurus awake, reinventing things, doing things differently, breaking out, breaking through, but also this time that's maybe been a bit unstable. And Taurus, by its nature, and it's a beautiful nature, but it wants stability and security. It's just had to do it in a very different way than before. So with things starting to shift in the 12th and the 6th, the focus is now on health, wellness. It's how you take care of your physical wealth, or your physical health, your physical body, and how you take care of your spiritual health and your spiritual body. The North Node in the 12th means we have to leave something behind. The 6 is very much a very real world place in anybody's astrology. It talks about the work that we do, the sort of the systems that run our lives, the things that we have, the duties and responsibilities that happen on a day-to-day level. So it's like your work, it's your projects, it's your routines, it's your daily rituals, it's your addictions. That's not necessarily going to be a relevant statement for everybody, but addiction runs the gamut. And so with the North Node in the 12th, you have this opportunity to let go of an attachment, including an addiction, including something about the systems that run your life that actually don't support your life, or maybe they did at one point and they don't anymore. Taurus, just by its nature, doesn't want change, and that's fine. But I think there's something, when the nodes are really pulling you into the 12th, you have to sort of make peace with life, and that life has different stages, and that there's a time of new beginnings, there's a time to let go. And then even for some Tauruses, it's not about health, it's about really opening up to spirituality. Because when the 12th is highlighted, whether it's an eclipse, whether it's what's called a transit, there's a need to go within. There's a need to reflect, to recuperate, to rest, and to even look beyond the physical boundaries of this world, because the 12th relates to something beyond this world. And maybe by extension, we're searching our soul. We're trying to figure out, what do we believe in? What's meaningful, for example. And so as you start to examine your spirituality, however you define that, I'm not saying in terms of religion, but spirituality is something that's very personal to you. It's your relationship with whatever's beyond this world. And if you're not sure, what's your process of trying to examine that, come to your own conclusions, figuring out a sense of deeper meaning, and even mission. What's your mission? So as you start to have these deeper, reflections, and maybe even some bigger aha moments, how does your day-to-day life need to change? Maybe you're used to treating your body a certain way, or eating certain foods, or just sort of mindlessly going through a certain routine, or sort of taking on a lot of responsibilities that aren't yours. And so how do you let it all go? How do you change your day-to-day life to match these maybe deeper spiritual realizations, or internal realizations that you're beginning to have? But for some Tauruses, it's a very traditional time where the physical body needs attention. And so you can use that information proactively. You're like, I'm going to schedule my doctor checkup. I'm going to make some positive changes in my health and wellness. I'm going to listen to my body. I'm going to peer into the relationship between my physical being and my non-physical being, and see how they are both interconnected. And for some people, there's going to be a strong need to serve. The 6th and the 12th, the 6th is like earthly service, the 12th is spiritual service. So there's this like, how do I show up in the world? How do I serve? How do I have an impact? How do I help people? And what's my inner conviction? What's my inner North Star that leads me forward? So Gemini and Gemini rising. So Gemini is coming out of this period where it had to do a lot of internal reflection. And in fact, because I know where all the other planets are, it's been a little bit of an existential time to be a Gemini. And this is coming out of a much larger period where there had to be some deeper and hopefully positive, ultimately positive emotional changes. So coming out of the 12th, which is where that, North Node in Taurus was, going into the 11th, it's now about the world. The 11th is community, society, humanity, social issues, social causes. And maybe it's a need to reconnect. Maybe it's a need to participate more in the world. And to the credit of the 12th and sort of its deeper questions and even spirituality, to live that out in the world and live that in your community. And this might be a time where the spotlight is very much on friendship, and whether it's to build friendship, whether it's to tend to existing friendships and strengthen them. But there are new beginnings in your social life. Everybody, of course, is going to live this a bit differently. But in some cases, it's because the nodes are there, because the eclipses are there. It's about a change in a friendship, a change in a group dynamic. Maybe because the South Node is in the 5th, because you have to really look at yourself and look at, your sense of identity and individuality and personality. And how does that show up in the world? Do people receive that? Are they hostile to it? Do they not receive it because you have this internalized fear that you're not good enough, or nobody really wants to be your friend? Or maybe you can be abrasive, or maybe you do show up in a certain way that isn't always the best way to create harmony and balance in your social life. Again, it depends on the individual, it depends on the person. But I think there's also a lot of gifts and talents with that South Node in the 5th. And how do you take your gifts and talents and share them with the world? And so the idea is, yes, take the best of you and share it with your friends, share it with your community, get involved in social issues and social causes. It's not about the self, it's not about your fame and glory, but it's about taking the best of you and using it as a support for the collective, for the group, for humanity, or for a social cause. For example, this is one of the classic periods that I see, eclipse at the South Node, or node in the 5th, which means eclipses in the 5th, where there can be a pregnancy or a birth of a child. This, of course, is not going to be relevant information for everybody listening, but for somebody who is in a particular life stage and this is something that they want, it's where I look towards the 5th, like what's going on with the 5th, because that's 5th, and then some other things can also indicate the starting of a family. But regardless, I think Gemini has to really get out there over the next 18 months. I think it's been a little heavy over the past year and a half, and probably even going into 2021. And with all the soul searching and Saturn you had Saturn in your 9th, and you're trying to figure out what you believe in, what you stand for. How do you put that out in the world? How do you make it real? And how do you live it, for example? Cancer and Cancer rising. So Cancer, this is actually a dynamic period for you. It's the start of a dynamic period. And as I highlighted in a previous slide before we started to look at the sign by sign, this crosses, the nodes are sort of making a 90-degree angle to you. Hopefully that's not too technical. But because of that, you are in a crossroads throughout 2023 and 2024. It's a dynamic period where the North Node in Aries, and Aries is your career sign, may put you in the spotlight or even the public eye. And Aries, being Aries, it's a sign of new beginnings, initiation. So it may be initiating a new beginning in your life, but more specifically, a new beginning in your professional life. It is very classic astrology when the nodes and when the eclipses are in a career sign, is that there are major changes in the career. And this runs the gamut from a new job or position, even a change of industries, and even a job loss. And this has been a little bit of a classic astrologer for a moment, but the nodes are, how do I put this? Our star can rise and fall. And that's the part in astrology that's a little bit esoteric. Like, what does it mean? But look at your own previous history and story with the lunar nodes and also the eclipses and those periods that we went through. It's like, what's the career story throughout 2014, 2015? And what's the career story in 2004 and 2005? And it's not to say that it's going to be a repeat, but look for the deeper theme, for example. As a result, you will have the South Node in your sign of home and family. So family need attention. And whether you have more duties and responsibilities in the home, or you have to navigate the responsibilities of career, the responsibilities of home, I think there's something to be said about sort of where the South Node is and where the North Node is. There's a need to sort of like go out into the world with the North Node in Aries. And I think, to the credit of the South Node and Libra for you, it's to really understand that home and family, whether there's a literalness to that statement, so your own family, or even like that sense of family, a sense of connection, your relationship with home and the past is the support and the foundation for your professional ambitions, for example. So how do you start to work on some old stories that maybe have made it a little bit harder to do the hard thing, to do the brave thing, to put yourself out there, to strike out on your own, for example? And sometimes we are haunted by the past, and we need to sort of sort through a lot of old memories, South Node, in the sign of the sign of home and family, for example. As a result, and kind of like we saw changes in career with the eclipses and Aries, there was very possibly going to be changes in the home environment. It's very traditional in astrology that when there's eclipses in the fourth, in your sign of home and family, in this case, people move in, people move out. There's a change of home, change of residence, or for those for whom this is relevant, is the purchase of a home. Because it's a time to really, yes, the South Node can mean the past and things that we have to work out, but really establishing and anchoring yourself with the buying a home or sort of setting up a household really marks these major milestones in our life. Leo and Leo rising. So Leo is coming out of a really dynamic period because the eclipses previously were in Leo's career and Leo's home, where it was really pushing you to go out into the world. And I think that in addition, you have your Uranus in your career sign. So it really ignited this bigger story about direction and what I want to do in the world. And sometimes career changes, or even in some cases, career instability. This is different, with the nodes going into Aries and Libra. Aries is a fire sign, Leo is a fire sign. So there's that support and connection, but this is a little bit more of a philosophical period for Leo and Leo rising. So this is a new period that, it talks about, what do you believe in? What do you stand for? The ninth, which is where Aries is for Leo, the ninth is where we need to sort of open up our eyes to the world. Every Leo and Leo rising is going to live that statement differently. If your world is small, the nodes and the eclipses, by extension, are trying to open up your world. Your world can be opened up through education, travel, religion, or anything that really, like a philosophy or a framework of knowledge that really gets you to understand the world around you. It's going to get into these bigger questions of what do I believe in and what do I stand for? And so that said, as a result, this is a new period that, I should say, initiates travel, exploration, a need to align with values and find mission and purpose in the world. Some Leo risings are going to get on a plane. They're going to go to different countries. They're going to experience different viewpoints. They're going to reach out into the world. And in some cases, Leo rising, it's the introduction of a philosophical, religious, or even intellectual framework that helps really solidify how you see the world. I think in some cases, it's about education, not like the participating of education. It's actually teaching. For some Leo risings, you're actually being the teacher. For example, you need to share everything that you know and to teach it. In some cases, it's about taking your writing, taking your manuscript and publishing it, or taking your ideas and broadcasting it, because the 9th is very much a space about broadcast. With the South Node and the 3rd, and even with the North Node and the 9th, it's so much about education in all of its forms right now. And so this is a classic period where you may go back to school. Of course, not every Leo rising is going to go back to school, but I've seen this with some of my clients. You go back to school, you finish that bachelor's degree, you go back to university, or you start higher education, you start your master's or PhD, and then again, you teach or publish a book. With the South Node in the 3rd, there is this deeper look at how do you communicate, listen, think, and make choices. What is the blind spots? What are you just sort of instinctively been doing? And in this space, there is traditionally, in your own astrology at least, like it's meant to be curious. So where have you been overly curious? Where have you been underly, if that's even a word, curious? But to really look at sometimes where you can be scattered, you're interested in everything, but take all these ingredients and put it towards something. And I didn't include this in the slide, but the 9th is a space of legal matters. And for a small group of people for whom this is relevant, this might be a time when a legal matter demands your attention, when you need to wrap up a legal matter, or you hear about a judgment, for example. Virgo and Virgo rising. So the North Node has shifted from this place that talks about, what do you believe in, what do you stand for, what are your truth and convictions, and it gets into 2 signs, the 8th and the 2nd, that really are the backbone of your material life. At the end of the day, we're all human beings. We need to make sure we have a roof over our head. We need to have some form of income or access to resources. Of course, some of us want more. Some of us just want whatever is right for us. But this is a time for you to look at your material life. What creates stability in your life? What works against stability? I think that there's that sense of past, that need to look at our past history, or sometimes the instincts that aren't always working for material stability and security in our life. But for some, it's not necessarily that. It's sort of looking at spending, looking at what do you invest in? What do you purchase? How do you earn a living? Do you need to make changes? Do you need to shore up your sense of material stability and security in the world? Classically, and there are a couple of ways of looking at the 8th with that North Node. Classically, the 8th is more of a space that is financial in nature. In modern times, and I don't think it's a modern invention, I think it's just was always there, we didn't realize it, is that the space has this deep emotional quality to it. It's a space of Scorpio, for example, and how this might be a time that's really bringing up deeper emotional experiences that can have a really powerful transformation on us, for example. But that said, the classic story arc at this time is that it's typically financial in nature. So there's spending, you are purchasing property, you are purchasing, making investments, whether that's just investments that are actually physical in nature, goods and resources, property, or investments that are not physical in nature. This is also a time, and I'm going to sound like a Scorpio for a moment, where we make our estate planning. The 8th is where we become very aware of inheritances, whether that's monetary inheritances or the inheritances that we have been carrying, for example. So maybe you need to do some financial planning, maybe some estate planning, making sure that you've got your will lined up, that you have your heirs, that you have sort of tended to all the little financial details that are necessary in your life, but also handling debt and maybe even dealing with taxes. Maybe because the eclipses are going to start to fall in your 2nd and 8th, spending and value may come under scrutiny. Is something of value? Is something not of value? Do I need to make changes in spending? There's another way of looking at the 8th. It's not just the estate, it's other people's money. So if you're in a partnership, for example, you and your partner or your partner's income or the sort of things that you own together needs your attention as well. I've seen investment properties get purchased during this time. I've seen some estate planning. I've seen partners having to work out issues around debt, for example. And then again, there is the other side to the 8th. And so you may have experiences over the next 18 months that bring you into a period that these themes around trust, intimacy, vulnerability, facing fears, and really accepting the changeability of life. And that's really at the heart of the 8th, is that there is an impermanence to life and that things change. And that's not always something that's easy. Because Aries, bravery, courage, is your 8th, how do you have the bravery and courage to go into the deepest parts of yourselves, to have the vulnerable conversations with a partner or a loved one that gets at the heart of something? Even intimacy, sexuality, for example, Aries desire, talking about desire with an intimate partner, for example, and leaving your comfort zone. The 2nd is really comfortable. It's like I got my food, I got my snacks, I'm at home, I'm in my jammies, I'm not leaving the house. But the 8th really can sometimes demand that we get out of the house, we really start to get out of our comfort zone and to do the things that actually will be a positive transformation on us. And for some, maybe this is a time where it's to have the courage and bravery to work on your emotional and mental health, go to therapy, work with other modalities, for example. Libra and Libra rising. So the North Node is going to be in your 7th, it's going to be reversed, and then the South Node is in the 1st. So this is just classically the start of a dynamic period. You are going to have eclipses both in your sign and in the sign of relationship. Relationship means different things to different people. Maybe you are presently in a relationship, maybe you're not in a serious relationship, maybe you've been seeing somebody, you're not sure what's going to happen. The eclipses typically will introduce you to a period where you will have your answer. Regardless, this is about a period of your life where people are coming in or old people are leaving to make space for something new. As an astrologer, to see eclipses in the 7th or eclipses opposite the sun, that's a classic period where I can see a marriage, the start of a serious relationship, a major relationship milestone between two people. Two people move in together. Two people have a baby, for example. And these are sort of these like major life milestones that can happen between two people. Regardless, it's a turning point. And I think the irony, because Libra is the sign of relationships with the South Nodes in Libra, the North Nodes in Aries, Libra has to do relationships a little bit differently. It needs to learn to connect to people differently, socialize, negotiate differently. And it might be a strong pull to sort of get out of your comfort zone and sort of maybe like be in charge of something and opening up to another person. Now, every Libra rising is different, but there is that classic people pleasing, whatever you want. That's sort of the tension, the irony with these eclipses, because even though Libra's like, yeah, whatever you want, Libra knows exactly what it wants. It's just, it knows how to play the game. It's ruled by Venus. So there is a bit of a back and forth with these eclipses between you and another person, but I think there is that instinct to negotiate and to find a compromise. And maybe South Node in Libra, look at the times where you weren't compromising, you weren't opening up to what somebody else needs, for example. That said, it's like the energy and the focus is on other people at the moment. Other people demand your attention, and you're going to have to shift your own life to accommodate that. That said, go back and look at the periods that I've mentioned in previous slides, the 2014, 2015, even into 2004, 2005. Do you start to see a little bit of a thread between those two times? Scorpio and Scorpio rising. So this is coming out of a very heavy period. I am a Scorpio, though. I think it was just a very heavy emotional time with the South Node in Scorpio from January of 2022 until July of 2023. Maybe there's some spillover because we had an eclipse in Taurus back in the end of 2021, but now you're going into a period where the North Node is in the 6th, the South Node is in the 12th. The 6th and the 12th, and the 6th in particular, you have Aries as your 6th sign, says this is a time where you need to sort of reconnect with life. There's a little bit of an irony with this because it has been so much about endings. North Node in Aries, whether it's reconnecting with life through taking care of your health and wellness, prioritizing health and wellness, in some cases needing to get back to the order and structure of your life, especially if there's been a lot of change and you need to reorder and restructure things. Aries as Scorpio's 6th sign, it's kind of why Scorpio is a bit of a workaholic reputation. You may be working a lot with the North Node in Scorpio. That said, on the other side of the sky, that South Node in the 12th. And this is the irony to it. It's like you're going into this time where you need to rest, recuperate, search yourself, search your soul, look for answers, meditate. And you're a little bit away from the world with the eclipses and this space. Because again, lunar nodes and eclipses go hand in hand. So how do you find the balance between a need to reflect, to rest, to get quiet, to go within, versus a need to really show up in your human life? Showing up in your human life means brushing your teeth, making sure that you take the dog out and you clean and you organize and you go to work. It's the mundane stuff, but it's the necessary mundane stuff for our life to run. There is a push and pull between the physical health and the spiritual health, and how do you nourish both? And for some people, it's a time to look at the rituals of life, whether it's the rituals that mark just the passage of time and the end of certain periods of your life, the rituals of life that come through a personal practice, a personal philosophy, the rituals of life that really mark your day-to-day life, for example, and really looking at things from a much more holistic viewpoint, for example. South Node in the 12th says this is about letting go, which seems like, okay, well, it's been a little bit of a heavy time with South Node in Scorpio, but how do you really truly release something? My joke about Scorpio is that even though they are technically the sign of release, Scorpio will release when it's good and ready. Well, maybe the South Node in the 12th says that now is the time to really let go of something. And since this is touching on health, this can talk about an addiction or an attachment, something that is not healthy or not supporting your health and wellness in your life. because both the 12th and the 6th are the spaces of service, they are also the spaces of helping and healing, but there may be a need to be of service more, to show up, to help because you feel that sort of spiritual motivation. You want to be a positive force in the world. You want to show up in your community. You want to help people, for example. But it's like, how do you start to focus on your human life and creating a sense of discipline, creating a sense of practice, maybe even reorganizing your day? Maybe you're like, you know what, I really need to start getting up early. I really need to start like going to bed sooner. I need to sort of like shift the axis of my life a little bit so that it creates a better system and harmony in the day-to-day life. But this is a bit of a change. We will have one more eclipse in Taurus. This will be on October 28th of this year. And then that's it for another 9 years. So maybe you just need to rest. Maybe you need to sort of get back inside yourself and sort of focus on really what really matters and start to answer some deeper existential questions, for example. Sagittarius and Sagittarius risings, we're going to round into the last quadrant of the zodiac. And so the North Node is now in your 5th, the South Node is in your 11th. So this is going to be a period where, you're bringing in the fire energy of Aries. Sagittarius is a fire sign. And so there's sort of this ignition of power and motivation and drive and courage. Classically speaking, this is a period with the eclipses and the 5th where there's a focus on the expression of self. And the expression of self can come through a lot of different ways, whether it's through the development of talents or even going into these bigger questions about identity. I actually personally really love the 5th as a space within our own personal astrology, because it's in this space that we can start to reawaken what makes us us. Fire, and you are a fire sign Sag, or you are a fire rising, gets into that spark of life, the spark that animates everything. And this is a little bit of an esoteric comment. In the history of the universe, there is only one you. There will only be one you. And there's a million different reasons that get in the way. And sometimes it's coming from you, of you really sharing what makes you you, and something that can never be duplicated. So for some people, it is like, these are my talents. These are the things that make me me. Or maybe it's to get back to that spark, that flame, that inner sense of individuality, so it can be lived. It could be a period where it is about creativity, and creativity comes in a lot of different forms. And, I wrote pregnancy and birth of children in the slide because when I'm, as an astrologer and I see somebody of a certain age and a certain circumstances, if I see eclipses in the 5th, it can possibly indicate a period of a potential pregnancy and the potential birth of a child. If that's not relevant to you as a Sag or Sagittarius rising, how do you recapture that childlike energy? Because the 5th reminds me of like a 5-year-old. That 5-year-old is just doing its own thing. It loves this. It doesn't like this. It has a strong sense of self and individuality that sometimes can get lost as we go through the many ups and downs of life. And Lord knows there's been many ups and downs over the past few years. So this thing around identity, who are you? What makes you you? This can be a time for you to sort of bring in that flare of life, that flare of self. But then there's the other side. The South Node is going to be in the 11th. And so that you did have the South Node in your 12th for the past 18 months. It's been a little bit of an internal time for Sagittarius. It's been emotionally heavy. I think there's been moments, even with Jupiter and Aries over 2022, where it was like things were happening, but at the same time, things were not happening. And maybe things were ending, South Node in the 12th. So how do you come back to life? And maybe that's where you're at right now, Sagittarius. You don't feel like you are fully back to yourself or fully back to life. So how do you use this time to really reinforce the things that light you up and give you passion. So the South Node going into the 11th, there is this dynamic push and pull between you and community, you and friends, you and your social circle. And maybe you need to assert yourself more. Maybe you've been a little bit lost in the group. Maybe it's time for people to see you, see your talents, gifts, and abilities out in the world. But maybe there's a need to look at friendship, the type of people that you attract, and maybe the people that aren't always the best friend, the one that's going to be the best support for you and really, letting you shine, letting you be your own individual as well. And I will also add that maybe this can get into like larger social patterning, like how you are culturated, how you are told to show up and told to be yourself. And I think there's pluses and minuses to that, like how we hold ourselves out in the world as adults, but sometimes that can be stifling, and sometimes that actually prevents us from being ourselves, for example. Capricorn and Capricorn rising. So we have the North Node going into the 4th, the South Node going into the 10th. This is the start of a dynamic period. Why? Because you, Capricorn or Capricorn rising, Aries and Libra runs up and down the sort of the backbone, the two signs that form the backbone of your life. For you, Aries is home and family. And Libra is your career. So this is a time where there's going to be a push and a pull between these two key areas of your life. Typically, when the South Node is in the 10th, is to look at this like deep instinct about either your professional life or sort of your professional ambitions, or maybe this part of you that will easily work for 60, 70 hours and neglect home or neglect the things that are actually feeding you and nourishing you. And I read this in an astrology book probably like 15 years ago at this point, and it always stuck with me. And it was talking about the nodes going from Capricorn to Cancer. And I realized that's not the case in this, but thematically to go from the 10th to the 4th, it's like you're the CEO and you're so used to like doing that type of life and world, and then you quit your job to become a massage therapist. So what do we take from that? I think that there's like, how do you find the balance between the duties and responsibilities that are required of you in the world and the things that you actually need? And maybe, and for some Capricorn risings, it's the need to prioritize home and family over career. This could be the time where you see it in the news from time to time. This person has left this job or left this position to focus on their family. And maybe that's kind of like a scripted response, but this is a time to focus on your family. Family means different things to different people. That could be starting a family. You're a certain age where you want to start having kids or establish a household. Maybe you're in a different phase of life and it is about trying to rebalance your life. It's been more about career and now it needs to be more about family. Maybe it's a different time in your life and your parents need more attention. They're getting older. They have a health challenge. They need to move in with you because they can't live on their own anymore. Or maybe it's to figure out something between you and other family members to address some concerns. So this is a new phase of life, and one where if it's not an establishment of a household or somebody moving in, moving out, it could be the purchase of a home, or it could be a move, but a move that is symbolic of a new phase of life. On the other side of the coin, you're very likely going to see changes in your professional life. This could run the gamut from a change of industry, a change of position, and for some, and I'm just saying this is not going to be the case for everybody, it's a job change and sometimes even a job loss. If it's not about your career, it's about these larger questions about the role that you play in the world, how you've been steering your life, sort of like towards what goals and aims, and how that maybe has run counter to the things that are actually more important in life or equally important, but you may, it might even be a promotion. It's like one of those things where it's like you really have to look at the individual astrology. Aquarius and Aquarius rising. So the North Node is now in the 3rd, the South Node is in the 9th. So Aquarius and Aquarius rising has not been easy to be either of these signs. You're coming out of a dynamic period where you have the eclipses in the 4th, home and family, and eclipses in the 10th, career, your public life. And that dynamic time may have shifted the axis of your life. Maybe you live in a different state or a very different place. Maybe there's been changes in your household. Maybe there's been changes in career, for example. So this is a bit of a different time for you, and one that puts more of a focus on education. For some people, for some Aquariuses and Aquariuses rising, there's a literalness to that statement. I'm going back to school. I'm going to take classes. I'm going to take workshops. I'm going to get curious and learn as much as I can about a subject matter or many subject matters. It's a time that's really inviting you to feed your mind, to open up your mind, to explore the world, to weigh your options, to be curious, for example. And there may even be a necessity for curiosity, because the South Node's in the 9th, and sort of the classic South Node in the 9th story is that you know what you believe in, you got opinions, you know what you stand for, and sometimes that can create some tunnel vision. And so it is a need to examine, what are your instinctual beliefs? I believe this to be true. Okay, well, why is it true? Is it true? Maybe it is, but maybe it's a truth that was something that's been conditioned, whether it's cultural, whether it's familial, for example. Maybe it's something that you just always took for granted. It had to be this way, but the North Node's now on the 3rd. And so it's to weigh your options, to weigh your choices, to weigh different perspectives, and to be in the curiosity of life. For some, this is very much about, it could be a philosophical search for new ideas, new realities. It could be where writing, speaking, and communication are actually very highlighted over the next 18 months. You are doing public speaking. You are writing a manuscript. You are getting that manuscript published. You are really sharing your ideas with the world, but you need to sort of make sure you check your source material, for example, and not to be in that sort of knee-jerk reaction with your opinions and your beliefs, but to be a little bit more open-minded about it, for example. For some, it's to look at, do you need to be the teacher? And Aquarius, just out of the box, is a sign that's very intelligent, and Sagittarius and Gemini, or Sagittarius is your 9th, for example, and Gemini is your 3rd, for example. Wait, that's not right. No, Libra, sorry, it's doing this wrong. Aries is your, sorry, too many signs. Aries is your 3rd, Libra is your 9th, but you are typically a very intelligent sign. Sagittarius is your 11th. That's what I was trying to say. And because you're an intelligent sign, maybe the nodes moving into the 3rd and the 9th means to share that wisdom and knowledge. And I don't know, maybe this sounds a little bit grim, but the South Node was in Scorpio for a while. When you die, God forbid, but one day when you die, all that information disappears, at least in this physical dimension. I'm sure it exists someplace in some other plane of reality, and maybe you're an Aquarius and you can get this, but how does information live on beyond you? How do you share your wisdom and knowledge? How do you share your ideas, your information? So for some, it is about educating yourself and seeing the world and opening up your eyes. And for another, it's about being the person that's actually teaching and sharing it. And I didn't include this with the slide, but sometimes when the nodes are in the space, it can bring up issues around religion, especially socialization and culturalization around religion, and even legal matters, if that's relevant. Finally, Pisces and Pisces rising. So the North Node is now in your second sign, and the South Node is in the eighth. So this is a bit of a focus. It's you sort of leaving the hustle and bustle of a lot of the eclipses that we've been having over the last 2 years. And now it's to focus on two signs that really form the backbone of your material life. So South Node and the eighth, this is your financial resources, it's your estate planning, it's that sense of resource that you have from other people, including a significant relationship, maybe even an inheritance. The North Node talks about your own personal income. How do you earn a living? What's your sense of value and worth in the world? So there may be these very particular stories that talk about money and resource for you over the next 18 months. But I think that there is something to be said about that North Node in the second. And because it's Aries, how do you find your money? And, maybe you've had to be more financially reliant on somebody. Maybe there's a part of you that wants to be self-employed, or maybe there's a part of you that needs to know that you can do it on your own. Because sometimes when we know that we have a safety net, we don't take the risk. Aries is very much a risk-taking sign. So it's not I'm not going to argue for taking financial risks. It's not about that. But how do you get motivated? How do you have the courage and bravery to bring in the resources, the financial, but also the material resources that you need, and knowing that you have it, it's yours. Nobody else can take it. It's something to be said when you know that you commingle money and resource with other people, or somebody supports you in a way that where you don't individuate. For example, I know my parents will always pay for this, so I don't develop the necessary skills and resources that I need to be able to do it myself. That's just an example, of course. So this might be a time on the flip side, because the eighth is this financial space where you need to take more attention to the debt that you have, if any, taxes, because taxes kind of fall within the aegis of this place, and even the financial or estate planning, for example. If it's not physical value and resource, it's also about these sort of more abstract concepts around value and worth, and even self-worth. Am I of value? Am I safe enough in the world? Can I get my needs met? Is this the way that I want to earn a living? Like, does this even make sense? Does this align with my mission and purpose, for example? On the flip side of things, because the South Node is in the eighth, this is a period that is potentially bringing up deep emotions. And the eighth is one of the spaces, in addition to money, where we really see the deep emotional body, the deep emotional health, the psyche, the things that we hold on to, the things from the past, and for some people, even traumas of the past. And maybe this question of safety and stability hits on some very deep points in the past. How do you have the courage and bravery to find security, to find your own 2 feet, to know that the earth beneath your feet is safe and secure, which maybe isn't always your first instinct. If it's not that, it's a time when you need to focus on your emotional health. And maybe it's long overdue to go book a therapy appointment. Maybe you need another modality that can sort of lead you through that space, or even lead you out of that space. And I'm saying lead you out, and maybe I'm a Scorpio, so maybe this sounds a little intense, but the eighth is our shadow. The eighth is our personal, air quotes, hell. And sometimes we get stuck in our stuff. Sometimes we get stuck in our own self-destruction, our sort of the past and our fears, and they can really hold us. So in all the, the force of Aries is the force to leave something behind, to strike out on your own, to get out of that space. But it's my feeling that we're not meant to do the eighth alone. We really need somebody to help us, unless you have a lot of self-reliance, to really help us to navigate out of our own, air quotes, stuff. So this is our opportunity to ask questions. So what I can do is I can stop the share. And if anybody wants to put a question in the chat, if anybody wants to turn on their camera and be brave and ask a question, that is what I'm here for. So I'm going to stop the presentation. Oh, see some faces. Hi, Wendy. If anybody has any questions, all is clear. Do you have a question, Wendy? You want to?
I do. Is there an easy way to access, like go back? The first thing I want to do when we jump off is kind of go through major life events and see where those nodes landed and kind of work from there.
So I'm going to give you the technical answer first. You need to look at what's called an ephemeris. So I don't know if that's a new word for you or not.
No, I have one.
So the ephemeris will tell you when was the nodes in Aries and Libra. And for those that don't know what an ephemeris is, astro.com has what's called a Swiss ephemeris that goes through all the centuries if you wanted to be a nerd. And it tells you where anything was at any particular date and time. So the ephemeris would tell me that for today, the North Node is at X degrees of Aries, the South Node is at X degrees, I think 29. Let's check. The South Node is at 2757 of Libra, the North Node's at 2757 of Aries. So that's an ephemeris telling me where that is. But if you're like, okay, where were the nodes on December 5th of 1998? Then you would go to the ephemeris data for 1998. If that's hard to follow because it can be a little bit technical, there are websites that will tell you not as like tables of data. It will just say like where were the nodes at different points. And if you know you're on astrology, you can be like, oh, the nodes were in Aries and Libra this time. The nodes were in Scorpio, Taurus at another time. Does that answer your question, Wendy?
It does.
Okay.
It does. I do have another question unless somebody wants to go. So how does that work? I'm very late degrees of Pisces rising. But that Aries is fully in my first house. So would I go more off of the Aries, just the first 7th axis versus?
So this gets into the particularities of somebody's chart. So I would say that it's okay, both. So let's break it down. So Aries for Pisces is the second sign. So you will see second sign, ergo second house experiences, money, income, material stability, security. But because of your, because of your own personal astrology, that's a first house Aries. And I think it's intercepted.
It is. So this is complicated for everyone listening.
So this is not only bringing up value and worth and money and material stability and security, it's also bringing up a bigger issue around individualization and going after what you want and having the courage and bravery to do so. Because if Aries is an intercepted sign for you, and hopefully this is not too technical for people, it means that hasn't historically been easy for you to access.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you're at a different point of life where your relationship with the archetype of Aries, ergo that interception, is very different than it was 15 years ago or when you were a younger woman, for example.
Oh, interesting. And I would agree with that. Okay, so it's a little bit of both, which I would agree with.
Right. That's my Gemini moon likes a little bit of both. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have a question? I know some people have had to go, which I know we're at the 2-hour mark. Yes.
So I'm new to this, and I am not an astrologer, but I am an Aries with a Libra rising. So when I saw this, I said to myself, I just have to come on this call. And I am fascinated because I did what I call a quick and dirty, going back.
I love quick and dirty.
In time. And it is, I mean, I just need to be with all of this. I'm wondering, I'm assuming we'll get a tape so we can kind of go back to this. I was frantically taking notes, but I am finding that this is so I've had my charts done since I was in my 20s. And there's always been this, what I call a confusion about whether I'm on the cusp of a what is it now?
Of like, are you at the
I'm on a
cusp
cusp of a Capricorn and an Aquarius in one of the dimensionalities. I can't remember which one it is. And this, when you went over all of this, I could see how my life has been influenced by that cusping, and why different astrologers have interpreted it differently. Also, I mean, it's really an interpretive process. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you, because I just really found this quite informative.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I taught it, because I made that statement at the beginning of the webinar that the lunar nodes are two of the most important points in the sky, but I don't think many people know that. And so for
Well, and I came on the call about 20 minutes late, so I did not hear that. I
okay,
did not hear your beginning comments. I was annoyed with myself, but anyway, I was able to follow as much as I could follow. And I do think, in terms of what you were talking about and how to pay attention to this new shift where the nodes are, I could see in my own life how strongly they influenced
yeah,
my experience of life, my perceptions, my experience, what was happening at different times. It was just really quite fascinating. So thank you.
with pleasure. So if you're a Libra rising Aries sun,
Excuse me?
are you you said you're a Libra rising Aries sun, or is it the other way around?
No, I'm a Libra rising Aries sun.
Okay, so you're born at sunset. But when you have Libra rising and you're an Aries sun, apart from being born at sunset, it's just a very dynamic, because typically it's the Aries is the first sign, but for you, Libra is the first sign. So it's just, there's this dynamic.
Yes, I have one of these big squares in my natal chart. Yeah. I mean, it's
right. And so for you, but this of course is for everybody, but it's just more so for you, this is such a period where the focus is on relationship and individualization.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
Anybody else? Thank you, Christina. I read your comment. Yeah, it's if you the nodes and the eclipses are in your relationship sign, relationships will need your attention, for better, for worse. And there's, I think, to the credit of Libra, there's always that desire to try to find the middle path, but we, at the same time, we can't betray what we need with the North Node in Aries. Yes, Kylie.
Katie, I just had a question on the upcoming eclipses, because the next two eclipses are happening on planets with major aspects. So I'm just trying to break down. So, for example, the Libra eclipse happening on October 14th, it's coming up at the end of the year. It's happening right on natal Uranus and square to the North Node in the fourth house of Libra. So I'm just trying to break down what's the primary energy, what's the, because there's a lot happening.
It's a lot of moving parts.
And on the Taurus lunar eclipse, it's happening on natal Mars in the 10th house. So it for me in my chart, it's highly activated. So what's the priority of energy?
I'll try to break this down, hopefully not make it too technical. So the planet getting the eclipse is
Uranus.
Okay. So we know that Uranus is this planet of awakenings, transformations, needing to break out of something that maybe doesn't fit us, a need for radical authenticity. So that energy becomes present because of the eclipse. that energy has been present at key moments in your life. So in a way, it echoes, if you're of a certain age, it can echo the first half of the 40s. It can echo other developmental phases in your life. Then we know that this is not just an eclipse that's happening in October of 2023. It's an eclipse that, going back to 2004, on October 14th of 2004, there was an eclipse at the same degree. So it's not to say that your experiences in 2004 are your experiences in 2023, but the energy got activated by a similar eclipse 20 years ago, for example. And so maybe you will see an echo of those two times. Because it's your own nodes. The nodes are this magnetic arc in your life. This could be a turning point. Maybe it's a turning point that you already started to see because you had the solar eclipse in April. Maybe you've seen it because you've seen it in different iterations of your lifetime. But typically when people have Uranus on the nodes, this is not an ordinary life. On some way, this life will push you to transform, to awaken, and to perhaps live a very different life than how you were raised to live it.
Excellent. Thank you. That helps me break down many activations happening on that one day. Thank you.
Anybody, and as a sort of as a continuation of that question, it's not just going to be October 14th. You're not going to wake up that day and like, okay, it's the eclipse. Like this is the funny thing about eclipses. You're seeing it now because the midpoint of the eclipse was Cancer season. And then when the sun got into late Cancer, and now we're in sort of the middle of Leo season at the moment, but you'll see it start to come in September.
Yeah.
Sort of this, God, it's crazy. Even the month after. So November, for example.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Welcome. Yes. Emily.
Hi. This was amazing. Thank you so much for putting this on. Couple questions. I'm actually in my nodal return this year. So it was just really interesting kind of learning about what it is I need to focus on this year and like where I should put my energy. I was just wondering though, is there like any relationship with the moon, like your sign, like your moon sign and the nodal return, or
it's not a direct relationship, but because it's the lunar nodes, there is a connection. It's your south node's in Libra. Where's your moon?
Scorpio.
So where does individuation, bravery, and courage, knowing that you can do things on your own, that you can leave toxic relationships behind, that you can navigate power issues, or between you and a partner, or even people in your life, you can really advocate for your values, your wants, your needs, your desires, have deep, intimate relationships with people, trust. So it sort of wraps into, if I had to use an analogy, these are just ingredients. These are raw ingredients in your life, and they make something. And at this point in your life, I don't know how old you are. I mean, I know when the lunar return is, but it's kind of hard to tell how old somebody is on camera. But this is a time when a deeper story that you may not even just be this lifetime comes to a head. So when I had my nodal opposition in my late 20s, the nodal opposition happens right before the Saturn return and what's called the progressed lunar return. There was a big story that happened in my life that I think definitely wraps around my south node and north node. And then the nodal return of the 30s, it's to sort of come back into something that I think pulls you into the bigger changes that happen when you're in the first half of your 40s.
Okay, cool. I had other questions, but I think I forgot because that was amazing. So, but that's it. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Lisa, you have your hand up.
Yes, I can attest that there's the orb of the eclipse season, and Of course, you said that the first one was the April, May. Truly for this cycle, is that what you were?
So the first eclipse for this cycle, so the first eclipse in Aries and Libra was an Aries solar eclipse on April 20th of this year.
Okay. Because I'm at a point where I've worked, well, in banking for over 30 years, but I'm at a point where I'm wanting to break out into my own healing business, and the North Node is in the second house, and South Node is in the eighth. So it's just like, I just feel it's like really, wow, this is exactly what's going on. And I'm just kind of scared to death. Is there any guidance or anything?
Is it the scary part of making changes in your life and leaving behind the security and stability of your financial life? I get it. I was 20 years in IT, and not banking, but did pretty well for myself, all things considered, and walked away from it. I think to the best of and because this has to do with money, like to create a lot of financial support systems for yourself. It doesn't have to happen now, but maybe you need to save money. Maybe you need to rebudget life. Maybe you need to figure out what's truly of value, what's not of value. Maybe you need to have a side income. Maybe it's not just about all or nothing. Maybe it's about doing two things at once and sort of doing it smartly. I think because the second and eighth are the fixed houses in somebody's chart, you want to the best of your ability, like not tear the house down first, unless life has done it for you. But it's to sort of make the changes that you need to do in order to maintain the stability and security of your life. But to start to bring something in that actually nourishes yourself. So maybe you're not going to get like this event that totally pushes you like into out of your comfort zone. I don't know. Or maybe it's you taking proactive measures. So hopefully that makes it less scary.
Well, I have been trying to initiate some extra income streams. So that's part of it. But yeah, just it's the way the world is changing. It's like, it's just scary.
I know.
Because I'm all fixed.
I'm Scorpio sun. No, I spent like judiciously saving up money. I had like 20 grand in the bank. And then that first year was hard. Like, and that you start to like eke away at your savings. And I was down to my last 5 grand, and I hadn't quite like gotten my client work to replace my income. And then the pandemic happens. And then I'm like, all right, red alert. How do I, in the middle of the world being on fire, like continue to maintain material stability and security in my life? And it was an inner shift that needed to happen in order for something energetic to happen, where my business actually doubled. So it can be literally about dollars and cents, but sometimes it's an emotional shift that needs to happen so that it just opens up for you. I mean, hopefully it doesn't sound like a magical thinking, but oh
no, it's always the inner stuff.
Money is just energy. It's just a physical manifestation of energy. So in my own way, I understand.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Guess we're all good. But yeah, Eliza, I see your comment. It's been grief. It's been a lot of intensities over the last 18 months. Any other questions before we wrap up? I guess we're good. All right. Well, I thank you all for your time on a Saturday, and your questions, and the lunar nodes for me are very fascinating. I'm personally super interested in eclipses. And as you heard me say a few times at this point, like eclipses and the nodes go hand in hand. And now your personal investigation starts to happen. And you're like, where are my own nodes? Where's this arc happening in my own astrology, and what was going on in that 2005, 2004, 2014, 2015, as I shared with you, had a pretty dynamic and big story, or big life change at that time, 18 years ago. So I appreciate you all, and this will be recorded and it will be uploaded within the next hour or two to the library, the account that was created when you registered. So there you go. Have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.